Good morning, conference. That's probably the best introduction I've ever had at party conference. Maybe that's because there's 3,000 people here. Here in the SEC in Glasgow. A very warm welcome to you all. I'm the business convener of the Scottish National Party, and it's my privilege to chair this campaign conference, the biggest ever campaign conference that the SNP has ever held. And can I give a very special welcome to all the many new members of the Scottish National Party, and this may be your first campaign conference. Welcome, one and all. Of course, we've had to struggle to find a seat for you all. The last time that we met in the SEC was in 2012 in the 600-seater room. And we thought this year, we're going to have to get a bigger room. So here we are with our fantastic soaring membership, now at 100,000 members of the SNP. Of course, we gather on the eve of the Westminster election with all to play for. But I'm delighted that the local address, the welcome, will be given by the Minister for Europe and International Development, Glasgow MSP, Humza Yousaf.
What a welcome. Thank you, conference. Thank you, conference. That was my mum. Hey, just behave yourself, all right? Conference, welcome to Glasgow, or now as we call it, welcome to Yes City. What a gathering we have here. Thank you to Derek for that wonderful introduction. Usually he introduces me as the second best looking member of the government. I won't say who's the first. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure, my great honour to welcome you to this fantastic city. You've come from all across the country, from the Shetland Islands in the north to Selkirk in the borders. You've come from Peterhead in the east. Thank you. All the way from the Western Isles out, of course, in the west. Even folk from Edinburgh have had a warm welcome here to Glasgow. To members new and to members old, whether you've been in the SNP for days or whether you've been in the SNP for decades, in fact, to all 100,000 of you, and to the 3,000 amassed here today, a record-breaking number, welcome to Glasgow. What an honour it is to be opening this conference. On the way here, I was reflecting, my grandfather first came to this city in the 1960s, like many other immigrants. He came here to work hard and to graft, to build a better life for himself, but also, of course, his family. His son, my father, went through education here in this city, has had a small business here for the last 30 years, has employed in that time hundreds of local people, and has made, through his business, a contribution to the city that welcomed him with open arms. And as I look at the faces in this crowd, I can see people from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different races, all your different faces. And this is the diverse Scotland, the diverse movement, the diverse party that I think all of us should be so, so proud of. Conference is a Glasgow boy, raised, educated, born here, now having the huge honour of representing this city in our nation's parliament. It is, as I say, a real privilege to welcome you to Glasgow. Glasgow is a city that is known for many firsts. We were the first city in the world to give Nelson Mandela the freedom when he was incarcerated in Robben Island. We were the first city in the world to give an African American the chance to study medicine and be qualified with a medical degree here in 1837. Fast forward 177 years on, and fairness is still at the heart of everything we aim to do in Glasgow. People ask me what was my favourite part of the Commonwealth Games. Was it, for example, the giant inflatable Nessie? Was it the giant cans of Iron Brew holding up the fourth rail bridge? Was it the dancing tonics tea cakes and the dancing wafers that we saw? For those who know me, the Iron Brew probably was one of my favourite bits. But in truth, the favourite part for me, conference, the most favourite part for me, was when all of us here in Glasgow, around Scotland, across the world, in one moment, we chose for the first time ever in the history of the Commonwealth Games to come together in one moment and raise money for the poorest children across the world. And in doing so, raised £5 million for the most vulnerable children in the world. It showed us that compassion defines us as a city and as a country, and by God, conference, isn't compassion needed? Not just overseas, but here at home too. Because in this city alone, we have the tragedy of tens and thousands of people queuing up at food banks due to Tory and Lib Dem cuts. Here in the 21st century, people are having to ask for a handout for bread and milk. For those Westminster politicians that have forced our people into poverty, let me say it here loud and clear. Shame on you, Scotland will make you pay. Conference, 6 months ago, we dared to dream. After the referendum, our opponents thought they'd put Scotland back in the box. Well, conference, not only has the SNP seen a phenomenal surge in membership, taking us to over 100,000 members, but we are part of a movement of 1.6 million and growing every single day. So let it ring out from this conference, right here and right now. We are no one's branch office. Nobody puts Scotland in a box. And for those who believe and for all the dirty dancing fans out there, nobody puts Scotland in a corner. And as we dream, we believe more than ever before that independence will deliver a better future, not just for us, but for those generations. If anybody thinks that that dream is dead, it is not. Believe me, independence is coming, and it's coming for all that. Conference, let me end by giving a very, very warm welcome to our newest members, particularly those who are attending conference for the first time ever. It's always this big, I promise you. So many people who have previously been completely disengaged from politics have now found their home here in the SNP. And amongst our new members are thousands of former Labour members who, as the late and great Jimmy Reid said, they haven't abandoned Labour, but the Labour Party has abandoned them. They undoubtedly see hope in the SNP's progressive vision. I was asked by a journalist today, he asked me, Hamza, do you think the SNP will make any gains into Glasgow's Labour heartland? Conference, let's send out a strong message, loud and clear. There are no Labour heartlands anymore. Conference, we need to let the people of Scotland know that only with a strong team of MPs in Westminster can we lock out the Tories from number 10 and ensure that Scotland's voice is heard. That will only happen, we know, if we pound every pavement, climb every tenement, persuade every person and chap every door. So, Conference, welcome to what I would say, in my humble but slightly biased opinion, is the best city in the world. The city where it isn't a statue if it ain't got a cone on its head. The city that invented chicken tikka masala. The city that only has 2 seasons, taps on and taps aft. Conference, welcome to Gallus, Glasgow.
Thanks, Hamza. Thank you. Thank you very much, Hamza, for that very warm welcome to Glasgow. Backstage, when Hamza was telling me about his speech, he says he'll make a reference. He'll have some dirty dancing in his speech. Well, I was a bit nervous, but you got the reference. But now I'm delighted to welcome to the stage to talk about the Westminster campaign none other than the MP for Murray, our campaigns director, Angus Robertson, MP.
Thank you very much, Derek. Can I do something unusual here? Can I ask every single person for whom this is their first SNP conference to put their hands up, please? Wow. Can I suggest to the people who are taking pictures, stop taking pictures of me, take pictures of that. Give yourselves a huge round of applause. Delegates, we meet in very auspicious times, both because what is happening in Scotland now, but also because of the milestones that we mark in recognising how we got here. Last week was the 79th anniversary of the death of Robert Cunningham Graham. He was the founder and he was the first president of the Scottish National Party. What some people don't know was that he was the first socialist member of the Westminster Parliament, and he was the founder and the first president of the Scottish Labour Party. Think about that. The first president of the Scottish Labour Party left the Labour Party and set up the SNP. Sound familiar, doesn't it? In a few days' time, we'll be celebrating another anniversary, and that's on the 12th of April. Because 70 years ago, on the 12th of April, the Scottish National Party won its first ever parliamentary election when Dr. Robert McIntyre was returned in the Motherwell by-election. He was ahead of his time. The SNP didn't win another parliamentary election for 22 years at Hamilton. Let's think back. Let's imagine what it must have been like when the SNP was polling less than 1%, and imagine the experience that we have now. Those of us who believe in a new Scotland, a better Scotland, an independent Scotland, just to imagine that within one single lifetime, the SNP would become the most successful political party in Scotland. It's been said before, I'll say it again. The SNP now has more than 100,000 members. We have more members than every other political party in this country combined. The SNP has won back-to-back elections to the Scottish Parliament. The SNP has won back-to-back elections to the European Parliament. The SNP is the largest political party in Scottish local government. And in a few weeks' time, the SNP can become the largest party in the Westminster elections in Scotland. However, that's not certain. The polls suggest it may well happen. Those of us who are knocking on doors, and I'm sure that all of you are, we know that it can happen. But we will not take anything for granted, and we will work every hour of every day until the polls close in that general election to ensure an SNP victory across the length and breadth of Scotland. Of course, we don't lose sight of the fact that the best ever SNP Westminster result was 30% of the vote when the SNP won 11 seats in 1974. I believe this year we can do better. I believe we will do better. Now, of course, Scottish Labour leader Jim Murphy, he says his party will not win a single seat. Well, I've got news for you, Jim. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And to the Liberal Democrats who think that they can withstand gravity and hope that the people of Scotland forget them cozying up to the Tories, I've got news for them as well. They're going to lose seats, just like the Labour Party, right across Scotland. We are going into this election in the strongest pre-election phase of support in the party's history, with our 100,000 members, our volunteers, making us the third largest political party in the United Kingdom. And this here, the biggest ever campaign conference with 3,000 delegates, 150% more than Perth just 4 months ago. A remarkable achievement. So what's it all about? What is it that the people of Scotland are telling us about their needs, their interests, their concerns, their expectations, and what is it that we offer the electorate in this historic election? More SNP seats means more influence and power for the people of Scotland. We'll play a constructive role in Westminster and bring ideas forward in a positive spirit. We offer a real alternative to the drab Tory Labour cuts consensus. It's time for a more responsible economic policy, one which boosts long-term growth, creates jobs, and delivers for all. We'll invest in childcare and vital public services. We will not waste £100 billion on a new generation of Trident nuclear weapons. We'll make sure Scotland's NHS is always cared for, it's budget protected, and its future secure in public hands. And we'll keep the Westminster parties to their promise of more powers for Scotland. It is good ideas and hard work that will win elections, not opinion polls. So hard graft, humility, and the daily determination to earn the trust of the people of Scotland, these will be the hallmarks of the SNP campaign. We take nothing for granted, and we'll work harder over these next 40 days than we have ever done so before. Last weekend saw the SNP conduct the millionth doorstep canvass of the campaign with 250 street stalls across Scotland. The 100th pop-up campaign shop opened this week. We're about to deliver the 10 millionth leaflet of our campaign since the start of the year, a remarkable achievement. And this week, the SNP won 3 by-elections. The SNP gained from Labour in Glenrothes with 55% of the vote. The SNP gained in Buckie with 60% of the vote. And the SNP defeated Labour in Armadale in West Lothian. These 3 victories came only weeks after winning in Gordon Brown's Kirkcaldy constituency and also gaining from Labour in Elgin at the end of last year. Some of our victors Some of our victors are in the audience today, so can I ask for a huge round of applause for SNP councillors Kirsty Reid from Elgin, to SNP councillor Sonia Warren from Buckie, to SNP councillor Marie Penman from Kirkcaldy, and SNP councillor Craig Walker from Glenrothes and Kinglassey. Well done. We've been winning elections since the referendum through hard work by excellent candidates and campaign teams. Now, not only do we have the Activate data management system that helps us speak to voters and target our efforts, we now have an SNP app. Woo! How many of you have the app on your phone already? Oh, there's quite a few. There's quite a few. Hands up those who do not have the SNP app on their phone. Don't be sheepish. Derek Mackay, oh, you're in trouble now. It only went online yesterday, so please go to the App Store, go to the Android equivalent. It's being updated daily. What is on this app? It's going to be a very, very powerful campaigning tool. Please download it and use it. Encourage others to use it. I'm running out of time. Just want to use my last remaining moments at the stage to say a few thank yous. Thank yous to my colleagues in the outgoing SNP group. It's hugely appreciative of their efforts in the last parliamentary term. So to Stuart Hosey, to Angus McNeil, Pete Wishart, Ailey Whiteford and Mike, we are a huge thank you to all of you. And can I also take the opportunity to thank our Westminster staff who work extraordinarily hard, to Luke Skipper, Lloyd Abu-Qatar, to Stuart Easton, Katrina Matheson, Anne Harvey, Chris Mullen Silverstein, Shabi Solano and Chris Levick. A huge thank you to all of them. I want to make sure that after the Westminster election we have far more members of the Westminster Parliament, that we have more staff, that we have the resources, that we are better able to make Scotland's case at Westminster. We can make history in this Westminster election. I believe with hard work and with a positive SNP vision we can win this election. We take nothing for granted, but we know it's possible. Let's make it happen. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Angus. And thanks for exposing the fact that I haven't yet downloaded the app, but I had 3,000 chairs to put out last night. Now welcome the National Secretary, Patrick Grady, who will cover the SOAC report and explain, particularly for the new delegates and members, matters of process.
Thank you, Derek, and welcome everybody to the SECC and to Glasgow Kelvin. I'm a member of that branch, and we're delighted to be the biggest branch in Scotland, and by definition, therefore, the biggest branch in the world. Just a few words on procedure for conference, because we obviously have so many people attending for the very first time. This little booklet, which hopefully you got a copy of as you came in. If you didn't, there are thousands and thousands of them outside. This is your guide to everything that is happening over the next 2 days. So please, when you get a chance, familiarise yourself with everything that's in it. It also contains the standing orders, which is the procedure that guides how the conference will work. You might have seen already the stewards, who are resplendent in high-vis vests. It's their job to take the cards, if you wish to speak, up to the platform. You can get one of the speaker cards from a steward, you complete it with your information, and they'll bring it up, and that indicates that you would like to speak. And we're very keen to welcome as many first-time speakers as possible. If you are keen to speak in a debate, please submit your card in good time at the start of each session. If you are called to speak, you will have a maximum of 5 minutes if you're moving the resolution. Everybody else will have a very strict maximum of 3 minutes to speak. And that's indicated to speakers using LED lights. So when you come up to the platform, have a look at those and watch what they indicate to you. In particular, a flashing red light means your time's up, and you're at risk of being cut off by the business convener. We want to make sure as many people as possible can speak and debate in the conference. It is one of the great strengths of the SNP that we have an internal democracy that is thriving. So I'm elected, like all the members of the National Executive Committee, by the National Conference. We're accountable to the National Conference. That's how resolutions get on the agenda. That's how people get elected and held to account. If there's a vote at any time, those of you who are delegates, not member visitors, those of you who are delegates should raise your delegate card in support or against the resolution as instructed by the convener. I have no idea how we're going to see people at the back. We might need binoculars to get the house lights up. I would also remind everybody that the internal session, which is the important exercise of our party's democracy, starts tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. The clocks go back this evening, so if you're intending to come forward, I've been practicing that. The clocks go forward, so if you're planning to come to the internal session tomorrow, please don't forget that and be here bright and early and don't overdo it at the social events this evening. I now see that my red light is flashing, so that's my cue to sit down and let the conference get on with itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'll reinforce the point. At last conference, believe it or not, a couple of our politicians spoke a wee bit too long. So I am going to be ruthless in the chair, and the reason for it is I want to be able to call as many speakers as possible. So conference, do you agree with the time limits of 5 minutes and 3 minutes? Yes. So let that be a lesson to everyone that's speaking. I've got conference on my side. Now we have the technical matter of approving the SOAC report, which essentially is the agenda for conference. There are no questions or cards in against. Can you show by acclaim, i.e. a round of applause, that the SOAC report is accepted? Thank you very much. Just as well, that means we can go ahead with conference, and what a start. Resolution 1, a fairer, more prosperous Scotland, to move Stuart Hosey MP, the Deputy Leader of the party, to be seconded by Linda Fabiani, MSP. Stuart Hosey.
Can I just say to Derek, there's 5 minutes and there's 5 minutes. Since this government came to power, this UK government, Scottish funding has been cut. Over the last 5 years, around 11% in real terms, a 25% fall in capital. It means since this UK government came to power, Scotland has seen a staggering loss of around £3.5 billion in real terms. The budget announced 2 weeks ago by the Chancellor will not improve things. Indeed, if his numbers are to be believed, and they're accurate, that would imply a further cumulative cut to Scotland of £12 billion over the next 5 years. We cannot put up with that. You see, it shouldn't surprise us, because this Chancellor and his budget has told us that he's failed by every single measure he set for himself, but they confirmed that with more and deeper cuts to come, they intend to make the same mistakes over and over again. What the budget also confirmed, however, and the previous autumn statement, is that the pain will not be spread evenly. He has changed the ratio of cuts to tax rises from 4-to-1 to 9-to-1, the clearest indication of an austerity-led Tory Liberal government who are trying to balance the books on the back of the poor. And we all know in Scotland where that pain will be felt. It'll be felt by the 145,000 households affected by changes to incapacity benefit, losing around £2,000 each. It'll be felt by the 370,000 Scottish households who've seen tax credits down by £930 a year. It'll be felt by the 620,000 families hit by the child benefit freeze, losing around £170 a year. It'll be felt by the 120,000 people losing on average £2,500 a year as DLA is removed. Friends, The pain of this austerity government will be felt by 835,000 households in Scotland alone hit by the 1% cap on benefit increases. So we know where the pain will fall, and we know why we need to do things differently. And the difference we want to make is because there's now a growing body of opinion that doesn't simply say we need a growing economy to fund our welfare provision, but that we need to squeeze inequality out of the system in order to provide a sound platform to grow the economy in the first place. But once again, the Tories, the Lib Dems and Labour, who've also signed up to 30 billion of new cuts, are swimming against the tide. But to do things differently, to create jobs, to tackle inequality, Scotland needs control over more than one or two taxes. It needs control over a range of taxes, personal and business. It needs control over the key economic levers like employment policy. It needs full control of welfare policy and the minimum wage. We cannot be in a position, as we will be under the provisions of the Smith Commission, where 70% of Scotland's tax base remain controls from London and 86% of welfare expenditure remains controlled from London. We cannot be in a position where key job-creating powers are run from Westminster either. So our priority over the next few years has to be to secure further economic powers, to tailor policy to maximise this country's strength and address the challenges we face, to take responsibility for key elements of employment taxation, such as employers' national insurance, to provide the opportunity to reduce the cost of employment in key sectors, particularly for people involved in research and development, to take greater responsibility for taxes, such as corporation tax or capital gains tax, to rebalance and reindustrialise our nation, to take responsibility for employment rights, including the national minimum wage, to provide greater opportunities to set policies to improve working conditions, address in-work poverty, and encourage more people to enter the workforce. Friends, we need to take genuine responsibility for social security in Scotland, such as the full powers over working age benefits and full devolution of employment policy, including the running of Job Centre Plus. There are many things we can do. We've laid out some. There'll be much more to come over the next 2 days, and I'm almost going to finish just on time. We have a choice: more austerity, a further 30 billion of cuts, an approach which continues to put the recovery at risk, and a further attack on public services and the poorest in our society, or real devolution on key powers, a modest rise in real-term spending to end austerity, and a very clear choice indeed: SNP MPs giving power to Scotland to create more jobs and tackle inequality, or more of the same from Labour, Lib Dem and the Tories. Thanks very much.
And Linda Fabiani to second, to be followed by Stuart MacDonald to move to speak in favour of the resolution. Linda.
A fairer, more prosperous Scotland. That's what every single person in this room wants for their country. It's what every single person who joins the SNP and becomes active believes can happen when Scotland becomes independent. But until then, what do? Until then, we have to do the best for our country. We have to mitigate the excesses of Westminster, the excesses of all the parties, the mainstream parties at Westminster. That's what our government has had to do in Scotland, mitigating the bedroom tax instead of being able to abolish it once and for all, mitigating the effects of the welfare reform that has come up the M1 to us from London. So how do we do that? That's the big question. How do we do that in the face of all these cuts? Well, we do what we always do. We stand up for Scotland and we fight for the rights of Scotland. And here's the reality. We had the vow. We were told there would be home rule, there would be near to federalism, and we could take these decisions. They lied. We had the Smith Commission. And even now, the draft clauses that have come up from Westminster have watered down what was even in the Smith Commission that Stuart talked about. That little amount of power and tax, that little amount of power over the futures of our people. They've watered that down. Not only that, the Secretary of State for Scotland hasn't even been up to the Scottish Parliament to justify their actions. So how do we mitigate? What do we do? We send our people to Westminster. We send SNP MPs to Westminster. We hold them to account. These people need to be held to account for the way they are treating Scotland and the way they are brushing us off as an irritation, because that's what we are to them. We need SNP MPs there, and I am absolutely sure that the influence of these SNP MPs won't just be good for Scotland, it'll be good for the rest of the UK as well, because let's face it, they're having a heck of a hard time. That's how Scotland will be stronger, led by the Scottish National Party. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And that was perfectly 3 minutes, a challenge for all the speakers, especially to include time for applause, which may feature in this conference. Please welcome our candidate for Glasgow South, Stuart MacDonald.
I can now see why Michael McCann is so feared of Linda Fabiani. Conference, you'll hear a lot over this weekend that this is the most important general election for Scotland in a generation. It gives us here in Scotland the opportunity to be heard at Westminster like never before, and it also gives us the opportunity to change the direction of politics in this country, away from cynicism and austerity to a more progressive place. When the former leader and former First Minister Alex Salmond stood down, he predicted that those who were energised from the referendum campaign would not go back in to the political shadows. Evidence here today, if ever he had to be proved right. Many people for the first time, but by no means the last, put their heads above the parapet at the referendum and believed a new Scotland was around the corner. A Scotland that would include them, value them, take their contribution, and they would be able to put their shoulder to the wheel. Now, we meet here in Glasgow, as Hamza said, a city that voted yes in the referendum, and a city that has always been the driving force for social and economic change. And it was here in Glasgow that the Labour movement flourished with radical ideas, people who weren't afraid to stand up for a better deal for Scotland. That was evident when Mary Barber was campaigning against the rent hikes, when Jimmy Reid was organising a work-in, when we fought for and won our own parliament here in Scotland, and when we voted yes in September. Glasgow has a history of always looking ahead, always setting its sights high. But Conference, higher still, we must set our own sights. If we're to turn this country around, then we have to be restless in our campaign to equip Scotland with the powers it needs to deliver the change that people seek. And that change has to be real. It has to result in better living standards, better childcare, more opportunities for young people, better pay and conditions in the workplace, a more secure future for our older generations. The guardians of progress are indeed the Scottish people, and that's why I'm so excited to take myself into this election and win in this campaign. But that change lies in the hands of voters. Only they have the permission to unleash a team of progressive SNP MPs. Edwin Morgan, in his fantastic poem for the opening of the Scottish Parliament challenged those who represent us not to pocket the people's trust and run away. The constituency I'm standing in is home to Castlemilk, where I was born. Some of you might know a famous song about throwing geely pieces out of 20-storey flats. Now that song, fun though it is, carries a fundamental message. People want a fair crack of the whip. No matter where they were born or what their circumstances of birth were, they want the fairest possible start in life. So friends, let's get out there. Let's give people confidence and hope. Let's win this election for Scotland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. There are no cards in against. Can I ask conference, is the resolution passed by acclaim? And if it is, you simply applaud. So the resolution is passed unanimously, and we move on to the second resolution on TTIP, to be moved by Alan Smith, MEP, to be seconded by Chris Stevens. Welcome, Alan Smith.
Derek, thank you. Good morning, conference. Sorry I wasn't ready earlier. Your precious cheering, I ripped that up faster than I thought. Conference, it's great to see you. You're a fantastic looking crowd. I heard just this morning that our SNP London branch has got more members than the entire Scottish Liberal Democrats. And, you know, let's look forward to after the Westminster election when there's even fewer of them. So the reason why we're successful is because we put the interests of Scotland, we serve the people of Scotland first and last and always. And that work continues. Now, it's important that the TTIP motion is after the motion that you've just approved, that we are in favour of a strong economy for Scotland. Scotland's biggest challenges are rooted in poverty. And the fact that too many of our people are struggling in their daily lives. Anything that will allow us to grow the Scottish economy must be viewed on its merits. We are pro-business, we are pro-trade, but everyone in this hall knows, every councillor across every chamber of Scotland that serves the SNP, every SNP parliamentarian in any parliament anywhere knows our primary duty is to the people of Scotland, not trade at any price. People don't live in an economy. People live in Scotland in a society, and we serve that society's interests. So that established, the TTIP scale is vast, as you see in the motion, and it's a clunky motion, and I apologise for that, but there is a lot to this. TTIP is work in progress as well, but it is valid for us to say that we are unhappy about the content, and we are unhappy about the progress thus far that we have seen whereby it's been negotiated. It's been negotiated in secret. Now that's not in itself unusual in a trade deal, but TTIP is not a regular trade deal. TTIP has way more significant implications for Scotland's trade and Scotland's democracy, and we set those out in the motion. The content also is hypothetical, but it is emerging. TTIP remains work in progress, but we can see significant risks to Scotland's provision of public services. I'll focus on two. Chris Stevens from the Trade Union Group will tell you more. I'll focus on water and on health. Scotland is not the member state within the EU or indeed within the wider world. I think that's a great shame, but it is the reality of where we are. And on water, within these islands, the fact that we have maintained Scottish water within public ownership, public control, and for the public benefit is unusual, is exceptional. Because UK policy in the main over water accepts privatised water as the norm. And within TTIP, I do not see sufficient safeguards to maintain our public water services. Likewise, in our health services, we have seen down south the UK LibLab coalition, LibCon coalition, I keep getting them mixed up, they're all the same. Policy of the UK government. You can't applaud me fluffing my lines, come on. The policy of the UK government has opened up the door to significant private sector involvement within NHS services in England and Wales. I do not see sufficient safeguards within TTIP to keep Scotland's provision of public services safe. Now, we're told by various Tory ministers that it'll be all right, don't worry. There's nothing in TTIP that'll cause you any problems. Well, I'm a lawyer to trade myself, and I don't buy it. And I'll say now, and Ian Hudson and myself, as your MEPs, are absolutely unanimous. Until we see specific exemptions on the face of the TTIP document that will specifically cover Scotland's public services, we won't buy TTIP either. And exemptions can be sought. And this is where, as an MEP, I have seen the TTIP documents. I've been in the locked vault of TTIP documents. I've seen them. As it stands, I cannot support it. But as it stands, the French government has been able to exempt the French film industry from TTIP. So if the French film sector can be exempted, I want to see a specific exemption for Scotland's public services. It's work in progress, so we can't take a definitive position yet, but I hope you will support that strategy. Please back the motion. Thank you.
And Chris Stevens to second the resolution, to be followed by Morgan Davies. Oh, there he is. Please welcome Chris. He's our candidate for Glasgow South West.
Thank you, Derek. Chris Stevens, elected member, seconding motion 2 on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. As Alan said, I have the privilege of being the Secretary of the SNP Trade Union Group. Current membership, 14,100. Which is larger than the membership of the Labour Party in Scotland. Conference, due to the minimal scrutiny and lack of transparency, the current proposals for TTIP represent the most dangerous attack on our democracy and the key role of government in improving our public services and our living and working conditions. If left unaltered, TTIP would represent Thatcherism's ultimate triumph. The highest of standards in goods and services lowered, the lowest of standards in health and safety, eradication of social and employment rights, and through the investor-state dispute settlement, the ability of multinational companies to seek the wholesale outsourcing of our public services. Conference, voters and their elected government should decide the role and function of our public services, not faceless directors in our boardrooms. Voters and their elected government should decide our social protections and our employment rights. At this election conference, we must make it clear that TTIP must be changed, that people can shape and change events, that the people are not powerless. The democratic will conference of the Scottish people comes first. This party, our party, must campaign with others to support our MEPs in dealing with these current proposals. We must also work with civic society and our trade union movement in Scotland, who are already organising on this issue, to ensure the reality of the proposals are understood and the threats to our public services are opposed. On the 7th of May conference, let us ensure that our message is loud and clear. Our National Health Service is not for sale, and neither is the right of governments to set the course of our public services and our social and employment rights. Conference, please support this motion. Thank you.
And now please welcome Morgan Davies, who is our first-time speaker at conference. Welcome.
It's a bit scary up here, actually. When Chris asked at the Trade Union Executive meeting for people to speak in support of this motion, I thought, sure, why not? No problem. I've spoken at some yes meetings. It's about 100 people there. It's only 3,000 here. But anyway, speaking at the yes meetings was where I first came aware of TTIP, because my knowledge of it before that wasn't that extensive. And at that point, it seemed to be a threat, as Chris has said, to the NHS and to the way that's organised. But in it becomes apparent that it's so much more than that. I mean, the main impact of TTIP is to harmonise across Europe and America environmental regulations, regulations on food, on workers' rights, on the financial regulations. And now, harmonisation in itself is not necessarily a problem if you harmonise to the highest level. The problem, of course, is that it will harmonise to the lower level. So the food standards regulations in Europe will be watered down to match America. The environmental regulations will be watered down to match those in America. The interesting thing from an American point of view is that on finance, it will be the American regulations that will be watered down because their regulations are tougher. They have actually imprisoned bankers, and they continue to imprison bankers when they act illegally, whereas Europe tends not to. This, of course, might explain why the American financial sector is so in favour of TTIP, but that's up to them. I mean, one of the most concerning aspects of TTIP isn't actually TTIP itself, it is the expansion of the ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Settlement System. Now that removes control from our elected democratic governments, and whatever else we think of Westminster, we can at least vote them out in a few weeks. But what the ISDS will do is it will put the corporations above the law. It will set up different structures for it. And we see that already. Just this week, the Canadian government was sued for $600 million American dollars because they refused to allow an American company to expand a quarry in Nova Scotia on the grounds that there were several rare species bred there, including whales. It was by the coast. And they are now looking at potentially having to pay out $600 million American dollars to a mining company. We've seen in Australia that Philip Morris has sued the Australian government through ISDS for plain packaging on tobacco. And ISDS is a real threat to the democratic control that governments can exert. It puts corporations above them. So I would urge you to support this motion. Thank you very much.
We want everybody out the hall at lunchtime because there's a leak in the roof that we want to look at. And can you ask them maybe to take their bags?
Okay. There are no cards in against. Can I ask, is the resolution passed by acclaim? It is. Thank you very much. Resolution 3 on third sector campaigning is to be moved by Julie Hepburn, to be seconded by Stuart MacDonald. Julie Hepburn.
Good morning, delegates. Periodically, there is a scandal or two at Westminster, in case we hadn't noticed, and occasionally these have involved lobbyists and their undue influence on MPs. So something needed to be done to clean up the system, and so the UK government did something. Somewhat unsurprisingly, though, they did the wrong thing, in the form of the Transparency of Lobbying, Non-Party Campaigning and Trade Union Administration Act 2014, for short, the Lobbying Act. It came into force on the 19th of September last year. You might be forgiven for being a little bit busy that day. I was sleeping and weeping. This is essentially a register for lobbyists, which has a number of issues, but there's different aspects to the Act. And the part that I want to focus on is something that I think should concern us all. This legislation introduced new rules on campaigning that places restrictions on what is termed non-party campaigning, which includes third sector organisations. It doesn't sound too sinister, but when you look at the detail and consider some of the implications, it's a very concerning development. It essentially places a financial cap on third sector organisations campaigning during the regulated period before elections, and it also places an unacceptable bureaucratic burden on these organisations, in my opinion. Campaigning will be affected if all three of the following criteria apply. 1, you spend more than £10,000 in the regulated period on activities like press conferences, public events, transport to these events, or the production of election materials like leaflets or adverts that will be available to the public. 2, these campaign activities are aimed at or involve the public, that's the public test. And 3, these activities can be reasonably regarded as intending to promote or procure the electoral success of a candidate or group of candidates, the purpose test. So if you meet these criteria, you have to register with the Electoral Commission and must comply with a spending cap over the regulated period. There are a number of other steps organisations need to take to comply with these new rules. These include putting a system in place to authorise spending on regulated campaign activity, including staff time, keeping invoices and receipts for payments over £200 and reporting to the Electoral Commission. Third sector organisations are currently trying to get to grips with these new rules, which have been described by some in the sector as shoddy, rotten, badly written and potentially unenforceable. It has been dubbed the Gagging Act by campaigners, essentially because it's an attempt to stifle public debate before elections. A cynic might conclude that the Tory government is trying to silence critics of unpopular policies like their morally bankrupt welfare reforms before elections. The SCVO has described the Act as a direct attack on the campaigning activity of the third sector that legitimately challenges government policy. They have decided to ignore the Lobbying Act and not register with the Electoral Commission. Because the third sector does have a crucial role to play in the debate about the challenges we face and the impact of government policy. To attempt to inhibit this legitimate freedom of expression is a sinister development, and it is indicative of how dangerous and out of touch this elitist Tory government really are. Organisations like Oxfam have expressed serious concern about their ability to campaign. So, for example, if they campaign on a policy like tax avoidance, which disproportionately impacts on poor people, and one party supports their policies and another doesn't, that can then be interpreted as them campaigning for electoral purposes, and that makes them subject to the strict regulations and constraints of the Lobbying Act. People in the third sector, and many will be here today, work hard to effect positive change and improve lives, many within very tight budgets. So to place this additional bureaucratic burden on these organisations and drain resources that could be put to better use is totally unacceptable, as is the culture it is creating, one where organisations have to think twice about their campaigns, not on strategic or policy grounds, but because of fear of falling foul of the Lobbying Act. And perhaps the most menacing aspect of this is the potential for individuals within organisations to be prosecuted under the law, breaking the law by criticising the government. I thought we lived in a democracy. The damage the UK government's doing to Scotland and the rest of the UK is heartbreaking, and it is so completely unnecessary. Not only are they trying to take away a lot of our rights and dismantle our welfare state, they're also trying to take away our right to complain about it. Thank you.
And now please welcome Stuart MacDonald, who is our candidate for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson, MSP. Stuart MacDonald.
Delegates, I am delighted to second this motion from Cumbernauld branch, and if the immense hard work of our activists across the constituency pays off in May, I will be absolutely honoured to vote to repeal the shameful Lobbying Act as the next MP for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkintilloch East. Conference, as Julie has explained, the Lobbying or Gagging Act has placed unnecessary and cumbersome constraints on the ability of our third sector organisations and trade unions to play their part in debating the future of our country. Everybody here today knows the utterly vital role that the third sector plays in speaking up for some of the most vulnerable people in our country, and on crucial issues such as human rights, workplace rights, environmental rights and animal rights. The ill-considered and politically motivated Gagging Act, which has made it so much harder to do that vital job, can and will be got rid of just as soon as we get rid of the Tories in May. Delegates, the criticisms of this flawed piece of legislation are many and varied. It has rightly been described as a dog's breakfast, poorly written, vague, confusing and incredibly bureaucratic. And while the legislation attacks charities and trade unions, it has done next to nothing to curb the influence of the real multi-billion-pound lobbying industry. But most fundamentally of all, it represents a serious infringement of freedom of speech, restricting legitimate criticism of government policies and their consequences. Public debate risks losing crucial voices at the most vital time, the expert voices of people who have knowledge of the issues from direct experience and who are well placed to make valuable contributions to the policy debates taking place. Delegates, it is irrefutably the case that this is an act designed by the Tories to drown out voices highlighting the damaging policies and consequences of those policies. And as a perfect illustration of this point, just a few months ago, Tory MP Conor Burns referred Oxfam to the Charity Commissioner for a tweet which suggested that Westminster austerity policies represented the perfect storm, forcing more and more people into poverty. Conference, as you and I know, that's not offensive political campaigning, that's a statement of the blindingly obvious. And it is highly appropriate that this resolution comes immediately prior to a motion on saving the Human Rights Act from Tory repeal. Of course, retaining the Human Rights Act is something that many charities would support. So by curtailing freedom of speech and freedom of expression through the Lobbying Act, the Tories seek to clear the path so they can target the other fundamental rights we enjoy as part of the Human Rights Act. Let's not allow the Human Rights Act to be the next Tory victim. Conference, despite lots of competition, the Gagging Act is amongst the most cowardly pieces of Tory legislation. I urge you to pass this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. And now to another Stuart. It's Stuart Stevenson, MSP, who is convener of the Parliamentary Committee.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by declaring my membership of the Standing Orders and Agenda Committee of this party, and I'll explain later why I do that. I hope that you have an enjoyable conference, but I hope that you learn a great deal. I hope you'll visit the many stalls that are in the hall next door. You listen to those with whom you agree, and you listen to those with whom you might not so naturally agree, but in any event are better informed. That is, of course, part of the process of lobbying. In other words, lobbying that is open and transparent and informs people is a good idea. Because when we make decisions in public life, it's important we do so on the best possible basis, that we understand all the arguments and the issues. But it's equally important that when people who are given public trust as elected members are, that you know why we've made decisions, what influences there have been on us when we make these decisions. So the lobbying process, if it is open and transparent, is a good contributor to effective public decision making. If it's sleeked, if it involves a reward that is hidden, if it is concealed from public view, then it is utterly to be deprecated. Now, that is precisely why, of course, I explain I'm a member of the Standing Orders and Agenda Committee, because this motion got on the agenda today because of my being on that committee and our taking a decision on the committee that it should be on the agenda, thus giving me the opportunity to speak to you. And it's important you know that I was part of that process. I think you'll probably conclude that I did so objectively and unbiasedly, but you should know that that's the case. In Scotland, the Scottish Parliament, the committee of which I'm convener, the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee, has produced the report on lobbying for the government at their request so that we can legislate on lobbying in Scotland, not focusing on people who are lobbyists, but on the process of lobbying at all levels. A simple, open system that requires people who do significant lobbying, and the barrier will be comparatively low, not measured by finance, but by effort, so that people can see what has gone into making public decisions. This is a million miles away from what has happened at Westminster, does not place constraints upon small organisations who've big ideas and big concerns and want to bring them forward. We can do it differently in Scotland. We shall.
Thanks, Stuart. There are no cards in against. Can I ask conference, is the resolution passed by acclaim? It is, thank you, and I apologise to all the speakers that have not been able to take so far. We turn now to Resolution 4 on the Human Rights Act, to be moved by Roderick Campbell, MSP, and seconded by Bob Doris, MSP. Roderick Campbell.
Conference, as you will be aware, we have an election coming. Last autumn, the Conservatives, in readiness for that election, announced proposals for a British Bill of Rights, even if they didn't go as far as to suggest withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights. It's hard to imagine that in November 1950, the UK signed the Convention on its first day, long before the UK even thought about joining the European Union or Common Market, as it was known then. The Convention was a reaction to fascism and Nazi horror, providing protection for basic political and civic rights, which are the marks of a civilized society. It was negotiated by Conservatives such as David Maxwell Fyfe, a Liverpool Tory MP in the days when Tories could win in Liverpool. What is fundamental to the Convention, however, is that it responds to changing norms. It is a living instrument, as constitutional lawyers describe it, a treaty which must be interpreted in the light of present-day conditions. Until 1998, citizens in the UK had no direct way of enforcing convention rights in UK courts and had to go to the European Court of Rights in Strasbourg. The Human Rights Act of 1998 changed that, and the Scotland Act requires Scotland to act in accordance with the Convention. Indeed, it could be said that the whole purpose of the Human Rights Act was to introduce a British Bill of Rights which was compatible with European and international standards. David Cameron's plans seem to be the opposite. Conference, the Conservative leadership, encouraged by the need to pander to Euroscepticism and UKIP, don't like the court, even though the institution has nothing to do with the European Union. We should have been warned, however, by the sacking of both the Attorney General Dominic Grieve and former UK Justice Secretary Ken Clarke in July, because both of these distinguished lawyers appreciate the folly of their party's proposals. Ken Clarke has been an active supporter of the court, pointing out that the British government has won 98% of the cases brought against them. Dominic Grieve's view is that the inference is that when the UK government does not like something that the court's done, it will just use Parliament to not implement what it's signed up to. Conference, these plans are not only bad for Scotland, they're bad for the UK and bad for Europe itself. The court has led the way in opposition to capital punishment on issues of sexual orientation, whilst at the same time laying down important markers in relation to fair trials, as we know in Scotland. But what is it that so upsets these Tories? Is it a right to privacy balancing Articles 8 and 10 of the Convention? Because these are complex issues recognised by UK domestic courts. Tory concerns about issues in relation to the alleged inability to deport foreign terrorists and criminals fail to recognise that the UK is a signatory to the Torture Convention, with the obligations that that entails. Maybe it's true that the court in prison voter rights case has not paid proper attention to what lawyers describe as a margin of appreciation given to member states, or indeed to the views of both the Westminster and Scottish Parliaments that prisoners should not have the vote. But when it came to it in February this year, to the disappointment of some lawyers, no doubt, the European Court decided that UK prisoners banned from voting were not entitled to compensation. And what of that other big bugbear, the court's interpretation of the right to private family life, often used to oppose deportation or extradition? Sometimes overlooked that this is not an absolute right, it's limited, amongst other things, by interests of national security. A British Bill of Rights would undoubtedly be very similar. And what of Scotland? In the Conservative proposals published in October, apart from a small reference to the claim of right of 1689, you could be forgiven for thinking Scotland did not exist at all. does not seriously consider the impact on devolution at all. What message do these proposals send out to novice democracies in Eastern Europe? That rights are not absolute, that they can always be overruled by parliaments of the day in those countries. Conference, the Scottish Parliament is embedded in human rights. Let's work to build on that foundation. Let's oppose those who seek to undermine that for short-term political advantage. Support the motion.
Thank you, Roderick. And now Bob Doris, MSP, to be followed by Margaret Ferrier. Welcome, Bob Doris.
Good morning, Conference. The Human Rights Act and the ECHR don't exist to make life easy for governments. They don't exist to court popular opinion. However, they do exist to keep a check on legislatures and governments to ensure that human rights for all people are afforded protection. And that is equally true in Scotland. We all remember the slopping out ruling that prisoners would be able to sue for compensation under ECHR, or the Supreme Court ruling in relation to Peter Cadder, and whether there was a right to have a solicitor present when initially interviewed by police. Two examples of Scotland and our practices being challenged in relation to human rights, and quite rightly so. And our response to reflect and to review our practices, not to seek to rush to the exit door and seek to ditch ECHR. However, that seems increasingly to the direction of travel taken by the current UK government. It's a high-risk strategy which would see the UK stand shoulder to shoulder with just one other European country, Belarus. Belarus, the country which Condoleezza Rice labelled one of the 6 outposts of tyranny. Dominic Grieve, former Attorney General, said such a withdrawal would make the UK a pariah state. How could the UK ever seek again to lecture any other country anywhere in the world on human rights? And the motion makes reference to the bedroom tax. And let's remind ourselves of the bedroom tax. 82,000 households across Scotland were to lose an average of £600 a year. Money to pay their rent, money to keep a roof over their head, the basic human right to shelter. 80% of households had a disabled adult. What about their human rights? Many single-person households needed an additional room for a visiting son or daughter. What about the right to a family life? What about the rights of the child? And yes, our SNP government has plugged that funding gap, but the UK government fundamentally breached human rights with the bedroom tax. And there are several other examples of the UK government breaching human rights. For time constraints, I'll just give one more. The appalling, the brutalising, the immoral position of the UK government on benefit sanctions. What about the human rights to put bread in your mouth and feed yourself?
Thank you, Bob. Time's up, Bob.
So we know what we want in this party and in this country: a written constitution, a Bill of Rights, fully enforceable in law and ECHR compliant. We want an independent state, not a pariah state.
It was a good speech, Bob, but you were nearly cut off there. Nearly cut off, nearly got the button. Margaret Ferrier, welcome. Welcome our candidate for Rutherglen and Hamilton West.
Thank you, Derek. I'll try to keep to my time today, Derek. Conference, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one which was adopted on the 10th of December 1948 in Paris, France. 48 different countries, one of which is the UK, adopted this. 8 countries abstained. South Africa and Saudi Arabia, to name but 2. A commemoration of the adoption takes place each year on the 10th of December. I would ask you to consider what this declaration is, the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice and peace in the world. This declaration should be a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations. We can look at a few of the articles contained within it to see why the Tory party is so keen to repeal the Human Rights Act. Article 23, everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment and to just and favourable conditions of work and to protection against unemployment. Everyone has, without any discrimination, the right to equal pay for equal work. Unfortunately, that too often gets forgotten. Many women have fought their councils for equal pay for many years, some dying in the process while waiting. That is shocking. Everyone who works has the right to just and favourable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity. Article 25, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing and medical care. We can see that many of those rights are seriously in jeopardy under another Tory government. Many people's standard of living falls way below the mark of what could be classed as an existence worthy of human dignity. Food bank use is rising by the day. If the Tories had their way, the NHS would be fully privatised, medical care would need to be paid for. Some people struggle to pay for life insurance. The key phrase that grabs me when I read the declaration is an existence worthy of human dignity. That's where the problem lies. Far too many people in Scotland today are only existing. They don't have a quality of life many take for granted, and we must change that. That is why a minimum wage is not enough, and that we should be doing everything in our power to fight for a living wage where a person can truly have an existence worthy of human dignity. The Scottish Government is committed to creating a modern, inclusive Scotland which protects, respects and realises internationally recognised human rights. And when we become independent, we will be a signatory to the European Convention of Human Rights. We must do everything in our power to stop the repeal of this Act. Conference, please support this resolution.
There are no cards in against. Can I ask, is the resolution passed by acclaim? To move Resolution 5 on the Smith Commission, I call Owen Thompson, to be seconded by Ian Blackford. That's not Owen Thompson, of course. So please welcome our candidate in Midlothian, Owen Thompson.
Good morning, Conference, and thanks for taking me for this resolution. I know many of us are still feeling deeply disappointed by the outcome of the referendum last September, but who of us could forget the days just before that when Gordon Brown came to Midlothian to make his vow, his promise of all these new powers that we were going to get for the Scottish Parliament if the people of Scotland voted no. The promise was for Devo Max, or nothing less than a modern form of home rule. Even came with a timetable. All the UK parties were very quick to endorse, and so came the vow. Many of you, like me, would have been deeply sceptical of whether or not they actually ever meant to go through with the details of this vow, but I don't think any of us would have expected of it to have fallen apart quite so quickly as it did. So while we know that many people across Scotland on the 18th of September were voting for these more powers, the sad facts of it are they were conned. It only took till 7:30 in the morning of the 19th of September for David Cameron to emerge from number 10. How many of us could forget that look in his face? 3 union parties have made commitments, clear commitments on further powers for the Scottish Parliament. We will ensure they are honoured in full. Well, to me, I'm certainly not seeing that happening yet. We heard from Linda Fabiani earlier, the Smith Commission, Labour's proposals to that, falling flat. The clauses that are coming through are not delivering on the promises that were made. Over the weeks and months that have passed since the referendum, the timetable that was laid out to us all has slipped, it's flipped, it's flopped, and finally we did get the Smith Commission. Perhaps another chance to make amends and backtracking that had previously occurred? Not a chance. Conference, I think it's important that we acknowledge the work of John Swinney and Linda Fabiani in the Smith Commission, because it could not have been an easy task. While we had representatives attending the Smith Commission meetings to try and put forward the case for progressive change for Scotland, they were simply met by a wall of opposition from a unionist cabal, simply looking to stifle and block every attempt of progress that we would try to make. While we've got a Scottish Government looking to take actions to improve the opportunities for people of Scotland, we continue to see a Labour Party repeatedly making calls for action on employment issues, yet Labour Party didn't even propose that through the Smith Commission. They actively blocked it. The reality is we've got a Labour Party in Scotland who claim to support Home Rule but will do everything possible to block it. They've got a Labour Party in Scotland who would be happier to see a Tory minister able to make decisions on the impacts of Scotland than having powers devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And we've got a Labour Party in Scotland who want to see claim traditional values, yet are anything but. This afternoon, Gordon Brown's coming back to Midlothian, a return visit, if you like. We wonder what promises he might make this time. But I would say to him, yeah, again, he needs to have a look at what the Labour Party are proposing. I mean, we see our ministers, our members of Parliament having public meetings and inviting anyone to come and ask questions, but yet again today, Gordon Brown in Midlothian, it's a secret meeting, a private location by invitation only. This is not how to get your message out to people. This is how exactly the Labour Party have found themselves so detached. So as we move into this general election campaign, we're now under 6 weeks. The simple fact is, the Labour Party have abandoned just about every founding principle they had. Under Jim Murphy, the New Labour, they have simply gone from bad to worse. So I would say this to many of the Labour supporters out and around the country. If you are a traditional Labour supporter and you want to see these positive changes for Scotland, come with us. There's an opportunity with the SNP to see this real change, and it's by electing the strongest possible team of SNP MPs in May that we'll actually get to see that change happen. Please support the resolution.
And Ian Blackford to second, to be followed by Emma Harper. And Ian is the candidate in Rossskye and Lochaber.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, delegates, and greetings from Rossskye and Lochaber. You know, when you go back to the period before the referendum, and remember what we were promised by Gordon Brown, acting on behalf of the 3 unionist parties, Labour, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats. Home Rule in the spirit of Keir Hardie. Taking Scotland to a position where we'd be in a federal UK, talking about powers over our economy, powers for a purpose to do something better for the people of this country. Now, we went into the Smith Commission in good faith. But what has happened? 85% of powers over welfare are to remain within Westminster, 70% of powers over tax. That doesn't reflect what was offered to the people of Scotland, home rule for Scotland in the period pre the referendum. So we're really saying to people throughout the country, those that voted yes and those that voted no, if you want powers for a purpose, if you want to give powers over Scotland that we can make life better for people here so we can grow the economy, deliver sustainable economic growth, then we need you to vote for the Scottish National Party on the 7th of May. A message of hope that we can do better, but it's also tied into the wider economic debate, because all three of the Westminster parties have signed up for more austerity, at least 30 billion of cuts to come over the course of the next 5 years. But our message is one about investment, a modest increase in government spending that will deliver an additional 180 billion over the next 5 years. Investment in our communities, investment in our public services, creating opportunities for jobs and to increase living standards, and that will lead to an increase in tax receipts that will lower the budget deficit, not the failed policies of the Conservative Liberal government that Labour seem to want to support with more austerity. So there is a real dividing line in that message of hope that we deliver and what's offered elsewhere. Now, in my constituency, of course, I'm facing a challenge from the Liberal Democrats, and in particular from Charlie Kennedy. And when I look at the leaflets that come out from them, they tell us that everyone knows someone that Kennedy has helped. I'll tell you who he has helped. He's helped David Cameron. He's kept him in power for the last 5 years. They also say opportunities for all. Well, let's turn that round to our advantage, because on the 7th of May, it's opportunities for the people of Scotland to remove the Labour Party, the Liberals and the Tories that have stopped power coming back to this people. So we applaud the people of Scotland. Come with us. Let's make sure that together we deliver for Scotland on May the 7th. Thank you.
And our next speaker will be Emma Harper, who's a first-time speaker at conference, but also our candidate in Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale. Welcome, Emma.
Good morning, conference. As Derek says, I am Emma Harper, and I'm your candidate for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale. I'm the nurse that's going to kick the last Tory out of Scotland. It sounds quite funny actually saying that up here. I acknowledge the lack of progress of the Smith Commission. However, any power is a step closer to independence. So, conference, let's send a clear, strong message to Westminster that change is coming. Every power matters, even if it is road signs. And I have an idea for that, actually, but I think I'll run to the red light if I tell you. So I want to make sure that everybody knows, and I know conference will agree, that we have a diverse team of candidates that we're putting forward for Westminster, and that way we will fight for more powers for Scotland if we all win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. And Emma will be followed by Claire Adamson and then Andrew Ewan. Claire Adamson, MSP. I know I didn't, in your own defence, give you much warning, Claire, and I know you had to come from halfway down the back of the hall. But wait, you hear the reception that you get by the time you get to the lectern. Welcome, Claire Adamson, MSP.
Conference, it's absolutely wonderful to be here today and see so many of our wonderful candidates for Westminster on the stage. I can't begin to explain what a difference it is from my first time at conference, and it's so good to see you all today. I think it was very right of Rowan Thompson to recognise the work that Linda Fabiani and John Swinney did on the Smith Commission as members of the SNP, and Linda has already expressed her disappointment in the watered-down settlement for Scotland. But as a Deputy Convener of the Welfare Reform Committee in the Parliament, I see day in, day out the damage that the control of welfare with Westminster has on the people of Scotland. Whether it's the devastating impact of work assessments, whether it's indignity of people being forced to attend when they are ill, when they are disabled, and when their conditions are recognised as life-limiting. We need an alternative to this, and yet every day in the Welfare Reform Committee we see the denial of David Mundell, Esther McVeigh, to even recognise the correlation between the sanctions regime and welfare reform on increased food bank use in Scotland. This simply has to end. Sheffield Hallam University have recently done some research for our committee showing that two-parent families are £1,400 worse off with welfare reform, lone parents £1,800 worth off, and disabled people £2,000 a year worse off under the regime at Westminster today. The concerns of the PCS have been ignored when they talk about pressure on sanctions, and it is my absolute pleasure every year as an MSP to have worked with the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights in their ethnic minority shadowing scheme. And this year, the young woman shadowing me had to return early to Glasgow because she was threatened with sanctions while she was on that programme. This simply cannot be allowed to continue. We can't continue to mitigate against bad decisions. Let's send a great team of MPs to Westminster who will influence and end austerity for our country and for the UK as a whole. Thank you.
I now call Andrew Ewan to speak. Andrew will be followed by Jerry Fisher. And Andrew is a first-time speaker at conference.
Good morning, friends. I think we'd all agree the Smith Commission has failed to deliver the home rule and near federalism Scotland was promised. Our SNP team did the absolute best they could in winning ground for Scotland. But when dealing with the Westminster establishment, it was always going to be an uphill struggle. The limited powers Smith does propose are nothing better than a begrudging offer made to try and halt Scotland's political progress. Conference with today's politically engaged electorate, trying to restrict the ambitions of the Scottish people will no longer work. The referendum was Scotland's finest democratic hour, the moment of fundamental reassessment and political re-engagement. The people of Scotland have sent a clear and powerful message to Westminster. Scotland demands radical change, and we will settle for nothing less. Now, it's not only the 1.6 million yes voters demanding change. Scotland's voice grows louder every day, demanding change and demanding it now. The Smith proposals would see the dead hand of Westminster still control vast swathes of Scotland's policy agenda. At a time when the very existence of our welfare state is placed in jeopardy by Westminster, the Smith proposals would still see 80% of our welfare system controlled by those who would dismantle it. The poorest sections of our communities are being locked into a downward spiral of poverty and despair by Westminster policies. The Smith proposals would allow that austerity agenda to continue, undeterred. Friends, we need control over benefits and universal credit to restore social justice within our welfare system. We need control over the minimum wage to ensure a fair day's work means a fair day's wage. We need a powerhouse Scottish Parliament. But the unionist parties, the three shades of Tories, the three shades of austerity, just do not get the message being sent to them by this nation. So delegates, let us send them a clear message ringing out from this conference by supporting this motion. Scotland demands the powerhouse parliament necessary to improve the lives of our nation's people. Scotland is impatient for change. By electing SNP MPs in the upcoming general election, Scotland will force Westminster to deliver that powerhouse parliament. And we, the party best placed to fight Scotland's corner, will not rest until the sovereign will of the Scottish people is fulfilled. Thank you.
I now call Jerry Fisher to speak in favour of the resolution. Welcome, Jerry.
Jerry Fisher, Oban, Lord and Branch. Thank you, Mr. Convener. A week before the referendum day, I sat and watched that lying cur, Gordon Brown, putting the biggest confidence trick that he'd ever been associated with over the whole of the Scottish population, when he talked about Home Rule, when he talked about near federalism, when he talked about his guarantee that these things would happen. He had no right to guarantee anything, because nobody that he was guaranteeing on behalf of would have accepted anything from him. But what he was doing was trying to get at that old Labour vote. The elderly members who had voted Labour all their lives, who knew that the Scottish Labour Party was founded on the basis of commitment to Home Rule, which meant quite clearly to them everything except foreign affairs and defence. He knew that that was not something that the unionist parties would ever go along with, but he guaranteed to that vote, which then stayed with the no camp. Guaranteed he did. The fact that some sub-editor in the Record a few days later took it upon himself to write the vow in the front page, which had nothing to do with the leaders of the parties whose name they put to it, is entirely by the way. It was Brown and his confidence that he could carry that old vote of the Labour Party that made the difference. What I'm quite clear in is that the Smiths Commission should have, and we must stand on the basis of, insisting that what we are fighting for at this stage is not a new referendum. I don't think we can do that within a few years at least. But what we can do is to stand for the next major step in that move towards independence, and that is Home Rule, meaning all the powers to Holyrood, save defence and foreign affairs, which were the things that worried that percentage of the voters who wouldn't say yes on the 18th of September. Let's go for real Home Rule and put Brown in his place, which he should have been in a long time ago.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. And for those more mature members of the party, you see, Jerry and I do sometimes get on. Thank you to everyone for keeping to time as best you could. Can I ask, is this resolution passed by acclaim? It is, which will bring this session to a close. Can I ask you to show your appreciation for the Assistant National Secretary, who's also on the platform, Emily Louise Purdy. who keeps supporting the National Secretary and myself. Can I say to all delegates and visitors and members, we need to clear the conference hall to prepare for the big event in the afternoon. But would any of you like to see the new PPB? Tough. But when I ask that this afternoon, I want a round and a rousing cheer, because there'll be a big endorsement in that new PPB that I'm sure we'll all look forward to. So thanks for your attendance this morning. I'll see you in good time this afternoon. But remember, we have to clear this hall to set it up for the leader's speech this afternoon. Thank you very much.